So joining me now is Dr. Michael Osterholm. He's an infectious disease expert at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Osterholm, welcome back to Meet the Press. You know, earlier this week, you and I spoke about this current race against these mutant strains and about the vaccine distribution. And you seem to, you said something that really stuck with me. So I want to show this screen of, this is the efficacy rate of the first doses of the three of the vaccines, Moderna at 80%, Johnson & Johnson 72%, Pfizer at 52%. Again, all the first dose efficacy rates. Do you believe we are now at a point where we may have to call an audible here on how we distribute the vaccine?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I have been one of those saying that we need to make sure that we have both first and second doses and follow the FDA approval process. But let me say right now, we do have to call an audible. I think it's no doubt about it. The fact is that the surge that is likely to occur with this new variant from England is going to happen in the next 6 to 14 weeks. And if we see that happen, which my 45 years in the trenches tell us we will, we are going to see something like we have not seen yet in this country. England, for example, is hospitalizing twice as many people as we ever hospitalized at our highest number. And so we do know that if we look at these first doses, that in fact we can even get higher numbers than you just laid out by the time of the third week after vaccination. So we still want to get 2 doses in everyone, but I think right now, in advance of this surge, we need to get as many 1 doses in as many people over 65 as we possibly can to reduce the serious illness and deaths that are going to occur over the weeks ahead.
If this decision, if the Biden administration agrees with your call here, they basically have to make this decision right now. The second dose appointments. They do have. Yeah, the second dose appointments basically have already begun or are beginning. So they have to do this right now. Do you think as you know, look, everybody's nervous because there's no perfect solution here. Do you think they're ready to do this, or do you think they're going to get cold feet?
Well, I think it's going to be tough. I mean, imagine where we're at, Chuck, right now. You and I are sitting on this beach where it's 70 degrees, perfectly blue skies, gentle breeze. But I see that Hurricane 5, Category 5 or higher, 450 miles offshore. And, you know, telling people to evacuate on that nice blue sky day is going to be hard. But I can also tell you that hurricane's coming. So I think we have to understand that because of this surge, we do have to call an audible. And again, we're not going to deny anybody their second dose. And actually, the data we have supports the longer you wait, the better you may do anyway with your vaccine. So we do know that if we get a number of first doses in people, particularly 65 years of age and older, we can really do a lot to reduce the number of serious illnesses and deaths in this next big surge, which is coming.
If we don't do this, let me paint for you one sort of nightmare scenario that I'm fearing, which is by the time that some of us get to the place in line where we're going to get a vaccine, that the vaccine available to me won't be able to deal with the strain that is circulating around this country. How likely could we be in that scenario, say, by the start of summer?
Well, I'm not sure that that's the scenario I'm most worried about. I think that the B.1.1.7 or the UK strain is going to become the dominant strain. And fortunately, that one has not shown its ability to evade the protection from the vaccine. But its ability to cause many more infections and much more serious illness is there. So I think right now that's the priority I would look at. When you look at the data on the other variants, we're very concerned about the ones from South Africa and Brazil that may, in fact, lead to evasion of the immune protection from either natural disease or from vaccine. But even if you look at the vaccine trials in South Africa, for example, what was missed in the J&J trial, no one who had the variant infection who was vaccinated died. So it may actually attenuate the serious illness and not just fully prevent it. So I think right now we have to concentrate on is what's going to be the surge. Imagine, Chuck, right now, at 120,000 to 130,000 people hospitalized at one point, we saw our healthcare system literally on the edge of not being able to provide care. Imagine if we have what has happened in England, twice as many of those cases. That's what we have to prepare for now. That's why I think we're putting forward this. The other thing we have to do is just prepare people. You know, we're all loosening up right now. You know, we see the case numbers coming down. We all want to end our pandemic fatigue and our pandemic anger that don't believe the pandemic's even real. We got to turn that ship around too. You know, we're really good in this country at pumping the brakes after we wrap the car around the tree. You know, what we have to do now is also anticipate this and understand that we're going to have to change quickly. As fast as we're opening restaurants, we're likely to be closing them in the near term.
How blind do you feel right now to the various strains that might be circulating? I mean, I've seen some epidemiologists say that, you know, we don't know what we don't know because we've done such a poor job of surveillance. I know there's some fears that, you know, we think there's a South African strain, a Brazil strain. People are worried about a Chicago strain and a Los Angeles strain. How worried are you about what we don't know and can't see right now?
I'm very concerned about that. But I think the good news is that I actually see action being taken with this new administration, unlike we've seen before. And so there really are efforts right now to, in fact, get us that kind of surveillance system in place as quickly as possible. And frankly, we need the Congress to pass the President's Relief Act because that'll help us also do more of this kind of work. So and right now we're flying blind, but I'm more optimistic we're going to have the data. But as you've seen, these viruses have come up quickly, and they have actually caused us more and more surprises. And just expect the unexpected in the days ahead.
If you can't have a K95 mask or an N95 mask, would you double mask? I know you're a little concerned about some of the double masking ideas. What do you do if you don't have a K95 mask to use?
Well, when we talk about double masking, remember, what we're really talking about is just trying to prevent the virus from being excreted by me into the air or me inhaling the virus from someone else in the air. And it's both a function of face fit and face filtration. Think about your swim goggles. When's the last time anybody leaked at the lenses? They leak at the fit. And so what we're concerned about is that many of these face cloth coverings do have already compromised fit or filtration capacity. If you add on another mask, you may actually make it tougher for the air to move through the two cloth area, and then at that point it causes more air to actually leak around the sides, which actually enhances your ability to get infected. So I'm not saying that some couldn't be used in a better way, but at the same time there are many that you may do more harm. Let me just say right now, one thing that's really to me very important is we see up to 25% of people who wear it under their nose. You know, that's like fixing 3 of the 5 screen doors in your submarine. You know, what's going on there? We've got to get people to start using these right. That would help right there tremendously. Yeah, well, if you've watched any football games in particular, a lot of these coaches are the biggest ones who forget to put this mask over their nose. Dr. Michael Osterholm, as always, sir, thanks for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.